Hello, and welcome back to my channel, the channel of the damned gorgeous. So, if you are the usual regular viewer who watches most of my videos, thank you for coming back. I'm glad to have you here. And if you are a newcomer to the channel, you just stumbled across it, stop stumbling for a moment and stay where you are because I really need the views. So, what are we going to be talking about today? I'm glad you asked. I thought I'd present my ideas on what makes a monster or a villain scary, chilling, terrifying. Because, I mean, there are so many in fiction. I mean, if I sat here and tried to list literally every bad guy, every monster, you know, in horror or just in general, I mean, it would probably take a couple of minutes at least. So I'm not going to try and do that, don't worry. No need to switch off the video yet. Stay for a couple more seconds. So I'm looking at what, for me, makes a monster, human or otherwise, genuinely chilling, genuinely disturbing, genuinely terrifying. So first off, I would just say appearance. First of all, your monster, I'm just going to say monster is a bad guy. Your monster, whatever, has to have a certain look. The xenomorph in Alien would be a perfect example of that. The xenomorph is really just one in a million design, and the xenomorph is cool looking. It's viscerally terrifying. It combines looking really, really cool and really innovative for the time to being also very, very, to having a terrifying, horrific appearance. And that's exactly the kind of I think that's a perfect example of a monster or a bad guy, a villain who looks the part. So that's the first thing I would say: look the part. Secondly, and I think this is just as important, perhaps more so, would be an utter lack of humanity. You know, in a lot of horror fiction or movies, you know, books, movies, whatever, it's quite normal for the bad guy to kind of interact on a human level with the heroes of the piece or the victims. Freddy Krueger's a good example. I mean, Freddy Krueger is not a nice man, but I mean, he interacts, he jokes, he laughs. There's a sort of, as monstrous as he is, you can see a kind of human side, albeit a twisted, depraved human side. And I think the xenomorph is another good example of a villain which is utterly utterly removed from humanity. The Vampires in Salem's Lot. I wave this book about a lot on this channel. The Vampires in Salem's Lot would be another really, really great example, I think. In a lot of vampire fiction, vampires are seen kind of acting like people. In Midnight Mass, for example, people become vampirized, but then they still retain their human kind of personalities. I should have said spoiler alert there. Anyway, so I always find vampires, for example, to be far more terrifying the way they are in Salem's Lot, where they are nothing but monsters. I'm not saying that they can't speak or anything like this, but they are nothing but monsters. They have nothing to do with humanity, and they don't act like people at all. You know, and this is what I find much more scary. The xenomorph is the same. Also, another science fiction example would be the Borg. Not the way they got messed up later in Star Trek Voyager, but the way they were first presented in The Next Generation. They were utterly inhuman, utterly relentless. And this is what makes a villain. This is what makes a villain or a monster terrifying. Say, the Terminator from the first Terminator movie, the xenomorph, the vampires in Salem's Lot, the Borg, all in their more original incarnations, are utterly relentless, utterly inhuman. You can't have any kind of human dialogue with them. All they're interested in is what they want. A xenomorph just wants to cocoon their victim. That's it. Vampires in Salem's Lot want to drink their victim's blood. That's it. The Borg want to assimilate you. That's it. So it's the Terminator wants to kill Sarah Connor. So if you're not Sarah Connor, you're fine. If you are Sarah Connor, well, you're in a bit of a pickle. So this is just utterly relentless, inhuman creatures that can't be related to in any way. Next up, I would say number 3 on the list would be what is the protagonist? What is the protagonist? What is the monster going to do to you? Now, of course, in any horror fiction or whatever at all, it's quite obvious that the monster, the bad guy, the villain, whatever, doesn't intend well for his, her, its victims. This is obvious, but there's ways for the monster to dispatch his victim. Some are worse than others. And the rats is a very, very good example of people being dispatched in an absolutely awful way. The rats, as you don't have to have read the book to put two and two together. It's quite obvious that the rats eat their victims alive. I don't think there's pretty much anything worse than being eaten alive by rats. So what they're going to do to you is absolutely horrific. It's not, okay, no one wants to be murdered. No one wants to be slashed up by Freddy Krueger or shot or anything like this. But at least in some cases, in some horror, the victim will get a quick or relatively quick death. But that's not the case with the rats. So that's the thing that is terrifying. The rats will eat their victims alive. And so if the monster, the bad guy, is going to, torture their victim in any way, prolong the suffering in any way, obviously that is far, far worse than a quick kill. So what they're going to do to you is another point. Sorry for me continuously turning backwards and forwards. It's just a reality of shooting a video like this. So next point, the villain, something that also makes a villain or a monster chilling, as in The Hollows. Now I'm going to do a review of this book, so stay tuned. So I'm not going to give away any spoilers. All I'm going to say is the monsters in this book are very, very resistant. And this is another thing that really goes towards making a monster in horror memorable and chilling, is when the creature or creatures can't be fought conventionally. Let's take the Blade movies with Wesley Snipes. Now, this is the contrary. You've got the Vampire Nation. Obviously, the Vampire Nation outnumber Blade considerably. Blade is one person, and the Vampire Nation is an entire nation. So there's probably more of them than there are of him. But the thing is, though, Blade is like super strong. He's far more deadly 1-to-1 than any vampire. So the vampires are the vampires are always undermatched. So you see that in different fiction. You often see I won't think of specific arguments now, but like black zombie stuff. A lot of the creatures are very, very disposable. There'll be a whole horde of them, and loads of them will get killed. That to me isn't as scary as an antagonist or a horde of antagonists, as in The Hollows, who are either impossible to kill, obviously, or very, very hard to kill. The xenomorph in Alien's a very good example of this. Not only does it look horrific, not only does it do horrific things, the crew haven't got an easy way of dealing with it. They've got to try and come up with different ways of managing this creature, because it's just essentially just popped out of nowhere. They weren't anticipating having to fight for their lives against some ruthless alien predator. So it's always scarier when the antagonist or antagonists are either hard to kill or very, very, very hard to kill. They either don't have weaknesses, or they've got very few weaknesses, or the heroes have to work very, very hard to find out what the weaknesses are. So this is always more scary. Oh, sorry. Next up, the final point, I would say, what can make a villain very, very chilling. And here I'm talking about a human example. This is from a book called The Manning Tree Witches. Again, I'm going to be doing a review of this book soon, so stay tuned. This book is historic fiction, and the main antagonist in this book is Matthew Hopkins, the notorious witch-finder general. I won't go into a great deal of detail about Matthew Hopkins now. Suffice to say, Matthew Hopkins was a real person. And this book, The Manning Tree Witches, is based on real events. Not all of the characters in it really existed, but some of them did. Matthew Hopkins did. Rebecca, the main kind of, we could say, hero of the book, if there is a hero, really existed. And a lot of the victims' names in the book, the women, they really existed. Obviously, these are fictionalized versions of them, but they were real people. So Matthew Hopkins is always a chilling individual to read about in horror, because Matthew Hopkins was a real person. And this kind of reminds us of the fact that, obviously real evil does exist. It does walk among us. And there's the kind of banality of evil, that sometimes it only takes certain circumstances, as it did with Matthew Hopkins, for evil people to really emerge and show their true colours, as it did in Nazi Germany. I once read in a historical book that was dealing with Nazi war criminals. The author gave the opinion that Josef Mengele, the horrific doctor of Auschwitz, he gave the opinion that if history had turned out differently, if there'd been no war, if Mengele had never been able to if he had never been placed in the position in which he was, he would have probably been just like a quite normal, competent doctor. So the Manningtree Witches is an example of how an ordinary man can become truly chilling and truly evil. And that, like, to get back to the theme of the video, real life examples of evil people are always scary, fictionalized examples, because we're talking about something that really did exist, really did happen. Okay, so if you're still here, thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it entertaining or interesting. If you did, please consider leaving a like or a subscribe, or you could also subscribe and like as you prefer. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.